Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well and having a peaceful day. In today's video, we're going to explore a powerful story about a woman who was pushed to the edge of life and the unexpected kindness of a stranger that slowly changed everything. When fear, misunderstanding, and hope collide, can a single act of compassion truly rewrite someone's fate? Stay with us until the end. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming videos. Morning light slipped through the broken gaps in the tin roof of the large wood workshop, cutting long, uneven lines across the dusty floor. Diep stood there, small and quiet, among towering stacks of lumber, her face tired but stubbornly calm. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of the first wooden panel. The sharp screech of the saws tore through the air, harsh and unforgiving, a constant reminder that this place showed no mercy to the weak. Inside her head, one sentence repeated over and over, steady like a heartbeat. I have to try. For my child. For a better life. She lifted the board, stacked it onto the cart, then reached for another. Each movement felt heavier than the last. Sweat soaked through her thin shirt, clinging to her back. A small cut on her palm stung as blood slowly seeped out, but she didn't stop. She pressed her lips together, forcing herself to endure. Around her, co-workers glanced sideways, quick looks filled with doubt and quiet judgment. She caught bits of their whispers as they passed. New one. She won't last. The words landed harder than the wood in her hands. Her chest tightened, pressure building with every breath. She wasn't here to compete with anyone. She just wanted to prove she could survive. She wanted a place where she wasn't chased away. When she finally placed the last board on the cart, she let out a slow breath, her shoulders sagging for just a second. Relief washed over her, but it didn't last. Anxiety lingered deep inside. Can I really do this? Against the cold, noisy backdrop of machines and steel, her small frame looked fragile, like a flame struggling in a bitter wind. She didn't notice that, from a distance, someone was watching her, not with suspicion, not with contempt, but with quiet curiosity. In that moment, Diep was still alone, fighting her fate by herself, unaware that her life was already drifting toward an unexpected turn. Survival weighed heavily on every breath she took, and hope felt both far away and dangerously close. Suddenly, a sharp clatter echoed across the concrete floor. Diep startled. She looked down and froze. One of her old, worn slippers had slipped off and skidded away. The other followed, tumbling awkwardly across the floor, her face flushed with embarrassment. She hurried after them, bending down. But before she could reach them, a tall figure stepped in. The man picked up both slippers and jogged after her. Hey, wait! The deep voice rang out behind her. Diep's heart slammed violently against her ribs. In an instant, memories crashed back, being chased out of her ex-husband's house, shouted at, beaten, humiliated. Panic surged through her veins. She ran. "Stop following me," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Pervert." Tears blurred her vision as she pushed herself forward, fear driving her faster than exhaustion ever could. Behind her, the man froze. "Wait, I just wanted to give these back." He lifted the slippers in the air, hands raised, his voice flustered and confused. Diep stopped abruptly, chest heaving. She turned around slowly, eyes wide and wet, her body tense as if ready to bolt again. Around them, the tension cracked when a coworker laughed. "She's beautiful. Just go confess already." Laughter rippled through the workshop. The heavy air lightened just a little. The man, James, stood there awkwardly, holding the slippers, a crooked smile tugging at his lips. Diep stood frozen, caught between embarrassment and deep caution. Her heart still raced, refusing to calm down. She studied him carefully. He didn't look like the others. His clothes were clean, neat, almost out of place among the dusty workers. His posture was straight, his expression sincere. There was no threat in his eyes, only a strange, quiet concern. That unsettled her more than anger would have. She quickly took the slippers from his hands and turned away, hiding the trembling in her fingers. Her cheeks burned as whispers and teasing continued behind her. In the middle of laughter and noise, two strangers collided in the most awkward, almost ridiculous way. Diep felt her heart stretch tight between old fear and something unfamiliar, a faint, unwanted flicker of warmth. She had no idea that this mistaken chase, born of fear and misunderstanding, would quietly become the invisible thread binding their lives together. The roar of the workshop faded into the background. All she could hear was her own racing pulse and the echo of unexpected kindness in a stranger's eyes. Later, beneath the scattered shade of a roadside tree, Diep crouched on the ground, arms wrapped around herself. Her voice shook as she spoke, every word dragging pain back to the surface. "They said I stole the land title," she whispered. "They drove me out, wouldn't even let me see my child." Tears slid down her cheeks, heavy and unstoppable. Each sentence reopened wounds she had tried so hard to bury. James stood beside her in silence, listening. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush her. When she finally paused, gasping for breath, he spoke softly. "I found the real culprit," he said. "You didn't do it. You're innocent." The words cut through her like a blade, snapping years of invisible chains. Diep lifted her head, eyes red and wide, disbelief and gratitude colliding in her gaze. "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why are you helping me?" James looked down, avoiding her eyes. His voice dropped, honest and unsure. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just know. I started worrying about you." The simple confession filled the space between them, thick with emotion. Warmth seeped into Diep's chest, a place that had been frozen for so long. She remembered nights spent sleeping by the roadside, the beatings, the humiliation of being blamed for not having children, when it was her husband who couldn't. Now, in front of her, stood a man who didn't judge her past, who didn't demand anything from her. He just cared. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and managed a fragile smile. James watched her quietly. Pity twisted in his chest, mixed with a growing urge to protect her from any further harm. Beside that quiet road, in that raw, exposed moment, two wounded souls stood close without realizing it. For the first time in years, Diep wasn't completely alone, even if she was afraid to believe it. But fear still lingered deep inside her. Fear that this kindness was only temporary, that it would disappear like morning mist. As the sun dipped low, painting the dirt road leading to the old farm in soft gold, James stood facing her again. His voice carried regret. "I'm sorry I doubted you," he said. "Let me make it up to you." Diep shook her head gently. "No need," she replied. "I'm used to living like this." James didn't accept that answer. "There's an empty house on my family's farm," he said. "You'll be safer there." She searched his face carefully, scanning for deception, for hidden intentions. but all she found was genuine concern. He explained that the house once belonged to farm workers, abandoned for years. He promised to clean it, to make it livable again. Memories surged, cold nights under open skies, being chased away again and again. She was afraid to accept kindness, afraid of another trap, but after a long silence, she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. James smiled, soft, relieved. It was the first truly relaxed smile she'd seen from him. He turned away, already thinking about brooms, water, repairs. As Diep watched him walk off into the fading light, her chest filled with a strange mix of gratitude and fear. Can I really trust again? In the wide open space of the farm, an invisible thread began to form, fragile, uncertain, but full of possibility. The evening breeze carried the scent of earth and quiet promise, whispering that maybe, just maybe, this kindness was real. James stood inside the old wooden house with a broom in his hands, sleeves rolled up, sweat slowly tracing lines down his forehead. The house had been abandoned for years. Dust coated every surface. Spiderwebs clung to the corners, and the air smelled stale and forgotten. Still, he swept carefully, moving from one corner to the next, as if every stroke mattered. As he worked, an image kept returning to his mind. Diep, standing in the doorway, eyes wide, finally able to breathe without fear. That thought alone gave him energy. He rearranged the few pieces of furniture that remained, wiped down the table, opened every window to let the sunlight and fresh air pour in. Later, at a small roadside shop, he paused in front of a rack of clothes. His fingers brushed over a simple, light blue shirt. He held it up, imagining it on her. This would suit her, he murmured to himself. When his car pulled up outside the workshop later that day, Diep froze. She looked from the car to James, then back again, disbelief written across her face. "You really did all this for me?" she asked quietly. James nodded, stepping out and opening the passenger door. His voice was calm, reassuring. "Get in. I'll take you to your new place." The ride was quiet. No awkward questions, no pressure. Just the soft hum of the engine and the landscape slipping past the windows. Diep stared out at the rice fields, golden and endless, feeling as if pieces of her old pain were slowly being left behind on the road. When they arrived, James led her toward the small house. The door creaked as he opened it. "This is where you'll stay," he said gently. Diep stepped inside and stopped. The house was clean, simple, but neat. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the wooden floor. The faint scent of fresh wood lingered in the air. She reached out, touching the table, then the chair, as if checking whether everything was real. James stayed near the door, watching quietly. His heart tightened with both hope and worry. Hope that she would accept this, worry that she might still feel afraid. Slowly, Diep turned back to him. Her eyes shimmered. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've never had a place like this." Something deep inside James loosened. He smiled softly. "Rest now," he said. "I'll come back later." He stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. Diep remained standing in the middle of the room for a long moment, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with something new. Hope, unfamiliar and fragile, but real. That evening, the kerosene lamp flickered softly in the small kitchen, casting warm shadows on the walls. James set down a simple meal: boiled greens, fried eggs, a bowl of rice. Nothing fancy, but it was prepared with care. "Eat," he said gently. "Have more if you want." Diep sat across from him, wearing the light blue shirt he had bought. It fit her perfectly. Her eyes glistened as she looked at the food, at the man in front of her, at the quiet kindness filling the room. She picked up her chopsticks. Her hands trembled. She took one bite, and tears fell. "I've never eaten anything this good," she said, her voice breaking. "No one has ever cared for me like this." Her tears dropped into the rice bowl, but these were not tears of despair. They were tears of release, of years of pain finally finding a way out. James watched her in silence, his chest aching for everything she had endured. After a moment, he spoke, his voice low but firm. "From now on, I won't let anyone hurt you again," he said. "I'll protect you." The words wrapped around Diep like an invisible embrace. She looked up, meeting his eyes without fear for the first time. There was no doubt there, no cruelty, just quiet determination. They ate without speaking after that, but the silence felt different, warm, heavy with emotion. Every glance, every small movement carried unspoken understanding. Diep felt the ice inside her slowly melting, the walls she had built over years beginning to crumble. James, in turn, felt overwhelmed by a feeling he hadn't yet dared to name, something deeper than sympathy, something that made him want to stay. Diep smiled through her tears. "Thank you," she said softly. "Truly." James nodded. He didn't say anything else, but his eyes said everything. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it with her. Later that night, moonlight streamed through the window, painting soft patterns across the room. Diep lay on the clean bed, staring up at the ceiling. The quiet felt strange, almost unreal. "This place is so calm," she whispered to herself, "so different from before." Outside, James stood on the porch. His voice carried gently through the night. "Stay as long as you like," he said. "If you want, you can help with the garden or the animals. I'll pay you." Diep sat up immediately. "No," she replied, shaking her head. "Letting me stay here is already more than enough. I don't need money." James smiled, warmth in his eyes. "Let the past go," he said. "Make room for better things." His words sank deep into her heart. She lay back down, memories replaying in her mind, being chased away, sleeping in fear, being told she was worthless. And now, a roof over her head, clean sheets, someone who cared. Still, a thin thread of doubt lingered. Is he truly helping me? Or is this only temporary? She told herself to stay cautious. Life had taught her that hope could be dangerous. Yet no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop the quiet belief growing inside her. James stepped away from the porch, leaving her alone with her thoughts. He knew she was guarded. He didn't blame her. He believed time would answer all her fears. Under the vast, star-filled sky of the farm, Diep finally closed